Before we jump into Premiere, it's important to point out that everything we're talking about here is for HD video. This means your camera should already be set up to record in HD. Now, if you have a hard copy or electronic copy of the AFN HD workflow, you'll find specific instructions in Appendix A for how to set up your camera. There's one for the 170 camera and another one for the 370. But the key is you need to shoot in 720p at 30 frames per second. Okay, now let's get into creating a Premiere project. To do that, you need to double-click the icon and launch the program. When Premiere finishes loading, you'll be greeted with this welcome screen. As you can see, you have several options here. Create a new project, open an existing project, and get help. Also, you'll see a list for recent projects that you may have been working on, which you can just click and go directly to. In this case, we're going to create a new project. When the program finishes loading, you'll be greeted with this new project screen. Here there's a few settings that we want to look at and verify. The first one is the video rendering and playback. Typically, our systems have an advanced video card in that allow us to use what's called the Mercury Playback Engine hardware acceleration. That is the top choice here. Now, some of you may be working on a system that does not have an advanced video card. If that's the case, you'll be able only to use the software-only version of the playback engine. That's okay. The Premiere will work fine. It won't work as well. So those that have it, it should be selected by default. Just verify that you have hardware acceleration selected if you can. The next one is our display format for video. We use timecode here. You can see there are other options, but we use timecode for our workflow. Audio is displayed by audio samples, which gives us the granularity that you'll see. That's based on the frequency that you record your audio in. You also have the option of milliseconds. Again, our standard is audio samples. Now, when it comes to the capture settings, there are a few of us that still capture on tape. Now, we still want to shoot in high definition, so you want to make sure that this is selected in HDV. If you are one of those stations that still use a tape format for recording. So make sure it's in HDV. The default is DV, so go ahead and select HDV. Now, these last two are very important. The first one is the location, and for that you need to find your way to the project folder that you created. So you can browse and of course navigate to our media drive, or in this case our M drive. Here's our projects folder. We open that up, and sure enough, here is the project we created in the last step. Simply select OK to use that as the location for our Adobe Premiere project. And lastly, we put in the name of the project, which we use the same naming convention that we described previously, which is the date followed by your initials, followed by a slug, in this case, MacArthur Awards. Now, before you hit OK, I want you to verify your scratch disk. Now, scratch disk is basically where will Premiere put media that's in work, video previews, captured audios, all of these elements that are created to support the projects that you're editing. Now, what we want to do in this workflow is keep everything in the same place, which is that same project folder that we created. So you want to make sure that each one of these says same as project. And you'll notice the path we've already set up is to our project folder. Once you've verified all of these settings, you can go ahead and click OK, which will then bring us to the new sequence window. And I'll show you a way in a minute that we can speed up this process by saving a preset. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to build the settings we need. And what we're going to do is we're going to close those, which are the default, and instead find our way to DVC Pro HD right here and twirl that down. We're shooting in 720p, so we'll go ahead and select that. Now you'll notice when you come in here that there's not a 30 option, and that's okay. Go ahead and select the 60 for now, and then we'll modify this in a moment to make sure that we have the proper settings. Now what you need to do is go ahead and select the settings tab. In the settings tab there's a lot of complicated settings for some people, others it's going to make a lot of sense. But the one we're most interested in is our time base, which is right here. You'll notice the default is 5994. That is for 60 frames per second. We're going to shoot in 30 frames per second. So what we want to do is select 29.97 frames per second. And for those that have been around for a while, you know that is similar to 30 frames per second. It's the drop frame equivalent, which is 29.97. All of the rest should be good. You'll see your format is 30 frames per second drop frame, which equates to the 29.97. You'll also see that we're shooting in HD anamorphic, which is our 16:9, and our sample rate for audio is 48 kilohertz. Okay, now that you have everything set up on the settings, we need to take a quick look at our audio tracks, and for that we go over to the tracks tab. Now this is really important that we pay attention here, because our job as producers out here is to make sure that what we produce now can be posted later or used later by other people. It's not just a finished product that we're putting out to air in many cases. So what we want to make sure is that we pre-position our audio that best suits our production. For that, we want to make sure that our master is still in stereo. And then we want to come down to these individual tracks. And you'll notice that the standard track type, or the track type, is default to standard. We want to change that. We want to change each of these to a mono track. And what this is going to allow us to do is set up the panning that will preserve our split audio. This is what's going to allow us to send off a production and let it be post-produced later. In other words, if you have an interview in a story, let's say, and you have B-roll over the top of part of it, that B-roll is going to have nat sound. We don't want to mix the nat sound of the B-roll over an interview with the sound of the person talking itself, or the sound of your voice mixed in with nat sound. That makes it a lot harder to edit later. So to do that, we're going to set up our pan. We're going to take the odd tracks and pan them left, and we just slide them over, and the even tracks will pan right. And this will give us the standard left right setup that we're used to for news editing. Also, you can go ahead and select these first two tracks to open, and that'll make it so that your waveforms and other things are visible when you first start the sequence. Again, you want a stereo master track and mono individual tracks. Now you can come in here and you can set up your track names if that would make it easier for you. So let's say we want narration on our track 1. Maybe we want to put nat sound on 2, and then we can put sound bites, let's say, on track 3, and then lastly, let's call it another one for nat sound. And you'll notice that what we've set up here is a separation of our primary audio, which is narration and sound bites, separated by panning them left from our nat sound on tracks 2 and 4, which are panned to the right. Now, if you don't want to have to do all of this every time, what you can do is save the preset. Just click on Save Preset, and we'll give this a name. So how about HD News Story? And we'll give a brief description. So this is 720p 30 frames per second, set up for news editing with mono tracks, pan left and right. How about that? Okay, and now we'll have this set up for us, and you'll see when we hit OK Now at the bottom of our list we have HD News Story as a sequence preset. Now when we come in here and create a new sequence, all we have to do is select on this HD News Story, and we won't have to go through all of the settings again. The last thing you need to do is give your sequence a name, and in this case what we want you to do is use the same naming convention that we've been using thus far. So again, it's going to be the date, the initials, and the slug, but the only difference now is we want to add original to the end, and this will be your indication when you're editing that this is my original sequence. I'll create my story in here, and then I'll duplicate this later on, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, for other versions of the story. So by putting original on the end there, it's your indication, hey, okay, this is my original sequence that I started everything with. All right, at this point, all you have to do is click OK, and it will launch directly into Adobe Premiere, and you're about ready to start bringing your video in.